Okay, so what I'm trying to do is talk to us about Scrum. Uh, I want to talk to us briefly about Scrum in a very few minutes, like the entire thing, because I know that why I'm doing this again is because we've been talking about this and we've been picking different fragments. But from time to time, it's important to also um, zoom in as well too, and then zoom out into the full picture, and then come zooming into each area um, as well. So this is a full picture of what Scrum is all about. As Samuel rightly said, that it's a framework, right, for solving complex problems. Originally, when Scrum was designed, it was more about an approach to delivering products, and it was very software focused, right? So, but over the years, it's getting application beyond just software teams, beyond just projects. It's being used even in day-to-day running of some business as usual teams as well. So you can't really call it a project management approach again. You can't really call it a product delivery approach again. So it's just pretty much solving a complex problem, whatever the problem is it's a framework, right, that the team works with. And a way to always remember the key things about Scrum is remembering that there are 3 pillars, there are 5 values, there are 3 roles, there are 5 events, and there are 3 artifacts. I don't know if that was deliberate, right? It's 3, 5, 3, 5, 3. 5 different things to think about: pillars, values, values, roles, events, and artifacts. And it's 3, 5, 3, 5, 3. Okay, so let's talk about those different things right now. We know that the full scope is that what Scrum believes that you have within a Scrum team, you have a product owner, a Scrum master, and the development team. Development team stands for every other person doing the work in the team, not just for software development, whatever it is. And because that terminology still holds a bit of software connotation, some organization just renames it and just say maybe the delivery team, for instance. So they just use the team generally, and there are some places where people even use terminologies like squads and things like that to refer to the whole team together. So anyway, product owner, Scrum master. Product owner is the person who really owns and drives the creation of the product backlog. Own and drives the creation does not mean it's only the product owner that writes everything into that backlog. Different people can contribute to it, but the product owner is the person who determines what comes in and what shouldn't, right? So, and product backlog, you keep working on it continuously. Anyway, I don't want to zoom in here. I'm still trying to just look at the full picture. The product backlog, when you have a product backlog, which you keep adding to from time to time, you have a refinement, which is a continuous activity, which is one of the reasons why it's not counted as one of the 5 events, because you don't just do it once in a week or once every day or something. Depending on what the team needs, it's a continuous activity. It can happen together as a group, it can happen individually and whatnot. And then you have the sprint planning, where you come to decide what goes into the sprint. Then at the end of your sprint planning, you have a sprint backlog, which tells you these are the things you are focused on delivering within this particular sprint. And the sprint must not be longer than 1 month. The most common duration of sprint today is 2 weeks. So we have 2-week sprints, because that's very common. Then every day of that sprint, you have a daily scrum. There are some little things like that where some people say, are you supposed to do a daily scrum on the day where you do a sprint planning, right? I mean, let's look at it. Is it very essential? If you already spent 4 hours in a particular day doing your sprint planning, there's no point coming back for another daily scrum again, because people just catch their breath and do some little work they can do. They can start their daily scrum the next day after the sprint planning. So then at the end of your sprint as well too, you then have a sprint review, which is where you're focused on reviewing the increments. Increments is what you created at the end of that sprint. And you're reviewing that with your stakeholders, and everybody's giving you input and feedback and things like that to determine, does this thing actually meet the definition of done and whatnot. Then at the end of that, you have a sprint retrospective. Sprint retrospective is the last thing you do to close the sprint out, which is we come together and say, hey, based on the way we worked this sprint, what could we have done better? How could we have improved? What are the things we did well that we need to appreciate ourselves? What are the things we learned and all that? So there are different templates online out there for doing a sprint retrospective. The most common ways to doing this is just asking 3 questions. What did we do well? What didn't we do well? And what can we do better? In other words, good, not good enough, and suggested improvements, right? And that forms different options that different people would create. Some people can say, right, what did we love? What did we learn? What did we, stuff like that. So some people could say that, what did we grown about? How did we grow? And which areas did we glow? So just using some fun words, related words like that. As long as it's all covering at least three things: what was done well, what wasn't, and what needs to be, what are suggestions on how to improve. So this is like a full scope of the whole thing, which we'll come back to again. But then let's zoom back in to start by talking about the three pillars. The three pillars is very essential because there is no Scrum without this thing. It's a pillar because everything you do in Scrum, in a Scrum team, needs to address these things: transparency, inspection, and adaptation. Transparency, inspection, and adaptation. So transparency, that's why you create a product backlog, so that everybody sees what everybody is working on. If you don't have a product backlog, many teams know that you experience this thing where there is no place where everybody writes what is going on in the team. You have to check it. What are you doing today? Oh, I'm doing this. I'm doing. Oh, I thought you said you were doing. Where is this? Where have you completed that? Where is this particular situation? So creating a product backlog doesn't necessarily mean you need to have Jira to create a product backlog. It can just be an Excel spreadsheet where everybody on the team writes what everybody is working on. So there is transparency. It's clear to everyone what everyone is working on. Then inspection. Inspection is about the fact that frequently you need to check the work that you're doing, and checking your work should not just be done by yourself. It should be done together as a team as much as possible. So you don't just go on working on something for 2 weeks and the only time the team is going to see it is when you finish the final product. You need to be able to share, you need to be able to discuss your progress so that you can be getting their feedback from time to time, right? 2 weeks is even a short time. Some people are working on something for like 3 months and they've not shared any version of it with anybody. That is not nice. It feels like you're just talking as if you're not doing anything. I always learn to say, if I'm working on writing a document that's going to have 30 chapters, instead of waiting until I finish the 30th chapter, I can be sharing chapter by chapter or 3 chapters incrementally so that you can be getting feedback. So inspection is very, very important in Scrum. And then adaptation. The purpose of inspecting is to be able to adapt, because you get some feedback, you get some thoughts, you get some suggestions, and you'll adapt correctly. Or you realize that, oh, I'm not working as much speed as I'm supposed to, then you would adjust your pace, right? Or you realize that you're not focusing on the right thing, then you adapt to that as well to make those adjustments here and there. The very thing is that many times when you talk about Scrum, most people just go and start talking about, yeah, Scrum is all about having your sprint planning. There, some people can do sprint planning and they would not have proper inspection because it's just coming. Everybody just comes to talk what it is they are doing. Nobody's showing anything. Nobody's sharing any feedback. Or some people are getting feedback and they are not even taking that feedback on board, right? Or people just coming to the daily Scrum session. They are not even just listening to themselves, just did as a check in the box activity. So that's why Scrum is not about starting from those events. It's not about starting from the pillar. These 3 things needs to be in the mindset of everybody on the team. Because if you have this, even if you don't know about those events, even if you don't do those events, doing these 3 things correctly can really help your team to even be adopting Scrum gradually, much more correctly. So transparency, everybody needs to have access to what everybody is working on. Of course, there are some teams where there could be some top secret things, like, maybe an HR person is in your team. They're not just going to put it on the board for everybody to see who they are going to fire next, right? But as much as is necessary, there should be transparency of the work across the team. Inspection, we should inspect our work frequently and adapt, change direction based on the feedback that we get. And the comment there says tactical direction. Adapting does not mean, oh, today we say we're going to build an app for bread sellers. They will say, oh, it's the wrong thing. Okay, let's adjust. Let's build something for travelers. Then next week, you're like, oh, no, it's not working. Let's build for book readers. You won't end up achieving anything that way, right? Of course, you could make those changes I said, but those are not the kind of changes you just make every week, right? You must have worked on something for a long time to realize it's not working, to move on to something else. But tactical direction means we need to clarify the big picture from the beginning. We are only adjusting, not just to dilly-dally, but adjusting which was the next approach, by still remaining focused on the goal that we have before us, not just changing the goal anyhow, anytime we like. And that's why it's very important that there is a clear product goal that you are working towards. And if your team is not really working on a product per se, there should be a clear purpose for that team of what we are working towards, a clear vision for that team of what you're working towards. So there you have it, the 3 pillars of Scrum. Then we talk about the 5 values. Sometimes some people can say, well, how can we differentiate what the pillars and the values? The pillars is talking about the processes, your way of working, things to keep in mind. So those pillars addresses a lot of things. It addresses the events that you do. It addresses the artifacts that you create. It addresses how the things should communicate and all those things like that. However, the values is for people, right? So values, which in other words is saying, this is what defines how we as human beings do things, right? The values that we must possess. In other words, the characteristics that we must possess as human beings. So it's really focused on the people, which is courage. The team needs to be courageous, do the right thing, face tough problems. You don't chicken out because something is hard. So it's very, very important. And the team is focused. That's why you have a sprint backlog. We're not trying to do everything on our product backlog at once. We create a sprint backlog, we focus on that and the sprints, we deliver that, then we go to the next sprint and do something else. Does that mean that we cannot change our sprint backlog sometimes? Of course. If something else comes that is urgent and whatnot, you can take those feedback and adjust your sprint backlog, but the whole team needs to discuss it. If you need to do that, the whole team needs to discuss it. So yeah, focus, very, very important that the team is focused. And the focus is not just about the list of things. The focus should really be on the goal, on the goals, because you can adjust as long as the goal is achieved. And while you have a product goal, which is a long-term thing, there is also the sprint goal, which is focused on what we need to achieve this sprint. So, okay, you need to be focused on that, focus on what you've committed to. So that leads us to the next thing, commitment. For you to be focused on something, you need to be committed to that thing as well. So each individual on the team needs to be committed to whatever you've planned for that sprint. And that's why at the end of your sprint planning not even sometimes, it's recommended at the end of your sprint, you have a vote of confidence where everybody says, are we confident that we can achieve the sprint goal for this sprint? 5 mean fully confident. 4, so yeah, good, but not good enough. 3, I'm a little bit on the fence. 2, I'm not confident. 1, there's no way we're going to do this. It's more or less like saying that hell is going to freeze over in the sprint. So taking that feedback so that people can then say, because people would only commit to the things that they agree to. It's difficult to commit to what you don't agree to. So it's important to get that feeling of those agreements as well. So, and these are some of the kind of conversations you have, whether you're having an interview or you're discussing with a new Scrum team or something like that, right? Take a vote at the end of your sprint planning to make sure that everybody is on board so that they can be committed. And respect is, I can't even overemphasize that, because Scrum is really, really centered on the people. It's not just about designing a rigorous process that people are then forced to obey like machines. It's giving that flexibility for people to be able to work together, in a sprint.
Hello?
Okay, so what was I talking about before the brief interruption? Respect. The team needs to respect themselves. Everybody's ideas should be respected. It's not that some people say something and say, oh no, we're not listening to you, we're not going to do that or something like that. So respect is very, very essential. Team members need to respect themselves, regardless of their level, regardless of their rank. And openness openness. And openness is not just even about the team to be open to themselves alone. The team should feel open even to your external stakeholders as well. They should be able to get visibility on what the team is working on. And if there are challenges, you should be open to share those challenges as well. Like a Scrum team does not suffer in silence. If there is a blocker, an impediment, an issue that the team is working through and it looks as if the team is unable to resolve it on time, escalate, right? Get a right stakeholder, get them in the room, speak with them, make sure that you reach out for help when you need it. In fact, before you need it. So those are the 5 Scrum values. We talked about the 3 pillars. Now we talked about the 5 values. Now we move on to then talk about, I picked the 3 roles first: the product owner, the Scrum master, and the development team, right? It's clear we know who the Scrum master is. We've been talking a lot about the Scrum master responsibility. The Scrum master is like a coach to the team. The principal role of the Scrum master is getting the team to adopt Scrum correctly. So making sure that they exhibit the pillars, guide the way they do everything. Make sure that they all exhibit the values. Make sure that they do all the events correctly. Make sure that they create the artifacts correctly. Make sure that the team is talking to each other. Making sure that the team is connected. Making sure that they write user stories correctly. All those different things like that are what the Scrum Master role is. Yeah. I love the comments that somebody gave as well too, that if you want to remember the Scrum values, there is the acronym C4C. That is CFORC, which is courage, focus, openness, respect, and commitment. So thanks for that. All right. So we're talking about the Scrum Master earlier. So the Scrum Master, doing all these things, you will have to do a lot of things to help the team to do these things correctly. If the team is absolutely new to Scrum and Agile way of working, of course, you teach and train them, right? You will even mentor the team as well, too, because you need to be able to do a lot of all those things. So this is how I write user stories so that they can learn from you. You need to, the backlog refinement, the sprint planning, you facilitate a lot of all those things, especially if you get into a team where your product owner is even new to an agile way of working. As a Scrum Master, you need to be able to model all these things and coach the product owner, work with them in clarifying the product goal, work with them in creating a product backlog, and a lot of all those things like that. And a Scrum Master also needs to be somebody who loves data, because you need to be able to analyze data and share insights with the team. You look at your burn down chart, your cumulative flow diagram, your sprint health charts. You look at your what's this one I'm trying to remember right now? Cumulative flow velocity is what I'm trying to remember. The velocity, the team's velocity as well. And not just looking at those charts, but interpreting them correctly. And there are so many other kind of data reports you can create as a team. You can create a data based on, which you will see from your velocity chart as well, like your committed versus completed, which means how many stories did you commit to do in this sprint? How many did you complete, right? You track things like that, right? You can run reports and say how many user stories here meet the definition of ready, right? We talk about definition of ready. Yeah, the definition of ready is what tells us that before we start working on a user story, this is the level of details you need to have. So you can run some reports, depending on the tool you're using, be it Jira or Azure DevOps, the two most popular tool for agile teams. You run those reports, you share those reports with the team. Some Scrum Masters, during their daily stand-up, they always show the burn down chart to their team and say, team, can you see? This thing is not really burning down. And then everybody's like, oh, what can we do to make sure that we are making progress? Because the burn down shows that we are making real progress towards the end of the sprint. So yeah, that's a lot about the Scrum Master there. And then the product owner. The product owner is the person who's got the content authority. The product owner owns the product backlog, creates the user stories into there, engage with different stakeholders and customers to make sure they capture all the user stories correctly in the product backlog, engaging people to get approval sometimes, to get buy-in, to understand how other products overlap with their own products and speak with those other product owners as well, so that everybody know where to put things. So it's not just only about just writing product backlog alone, and also continuously being available for the team when they need to clarify things, to engage with them and clarify all that. So because of all those things, the product owner's responsibility is very close to what business analysts do in teams. So there are a lot of organizations where they just make their business analyst the product owner as well. But there are some teams where you need the product owner to be a senior person who really has that level of authority to determine what goes in and what doesn't go in. And then they could still have a business analyst working with the product owner as well. So those are two different options that exist a lot. So yeah, that's it with the product owner. Is really the content, is really what are we building, right? Why are we building this thing? Those are the kind of things that the product owner answers. And it's also sometimes, when do we have to complete some things? The product owner can tell you we have some critical milestones at X time or X days, right? So the team can then plan their work around it, prioritize things correctly, and align with that. And then the development team does all the work. So all the different skills are within the development team, depending on what that whole team is working towards. Your development team can just be a bunch of writers if you are working on a writing delivery or something, right? It could be a mix of digital marketing executives and content writers and graphic designers. If that Scrum team is a marketing team, and you could have software engineers and UX, UI designers and software architects and all that, if that team is working on delivering a software. And it could be a bunch of carpenters, right? If it's furniture you are making, or builders and plumbers and electricians, if it's a house that Scrum team is working on. So those are the three roles: the Scrum Master, which we see here, the product owner, and the development team. So what are the 5 events that these people? 5 events mean regular cadence. Is it that you're doing this every week or every 2 weeks or every month, or you're doing this every day? Those are events. You have scheduled in your calendar, fixed time. You cannot say this sprint is 2 weeks, next sprint is 3 weeks. No, you don't do that. If you say it's 2 weeks, it would always be 2 weeks sprint. Now, if you say it's 3 weeks, it will always be 3 weeks sprint. So that schedule is recurrent. So you've got the sprint planning. You've got the sprint planning where you come together to determine what are we pulling from the product backlog into the sprint planning. And what are we going to, how do we break down those things into details, explain them in detail? And at the end of the sprint planning, we have a clear sprint goal, right? And before your sprint planning, you have the, I'm sorry, I shouldn't necessarily say before the sprint planning, because the backlog refinement is a continuous activity, but at least it's one of the things you do to get ready for sprint planning. So it can be every week, can be every day, can be twice a week, can be once in 2 weeks, whatever. But at least you must do a refinement once in a particular sprint at the least, because that's where you look at your backlog, because your backlog is a very long list. Everything is at different level of details. Refinement is where you actually do the work to get some things ready. So if maybe 10 stories, well detailed, meet the definition of ready for your next sprint planning. So that next sprint planning might only fetch 5 or 6 out of those items that are at the top of that list. So you have your sprint planning. At the end of your sprint planning, you have a sprint backlog. And that sprint backlog, the whole scope of that sprint backlog is to achieve your sprint goal. So every sprint backlog must have a sprint goal, so that we don't just see ourselves as delivering a list of things, but we see that we are working towards a major goal. And that sprint backlog is where the team is looking at every daily scrum and say, where are we with this? Where are we with this? And we're discussing those things and say, are we making progress towards our goal? Do we have anything holding us back? Nothing. Some people think as a daily scrum is only where everybody else. What did you do yesterday? What did you do today? Do you have any blockers? A daily scrum is more than that. A daily scrum is really conversation towards making sure that we achieve the sprint goal. So if that conversation involves just 2 people on the team talking that day, so be it. If that means everybody on the team talks, so be it. But it's always encouraged that everybody talks every day, so that everybody, can hear what it is that they're working on. Everybody has that intention to be able to, not so that they don't see the daily scrum as a call to report. It's a call to inspect together. Where are we today? And how are we going? And where are we does not mean where are you, Darren? Where are you, Samuel? Where are you, Folano? It's where are we together as a team. So the team can have coach teams where some days everybody talks one after the other. Some other days, people who have the most high priority items just focus and provide more details so that they can get feedback with the team and things like that. So avoid having to then say, we just use every day to just talk all around, and then we'll schedule another meeting to pick details. There's a waste of time. So use your daily scrum flexibly, as long as you're focused on what is on your sprint backlog and what your sprint goal is all about. And at the end of the sprint, you create an increment. The increment is what says, boom, this is a valuable output from the sprint. Your increment is like sprint backlog is a list of all the things you want to do. Increment is like when you've taken those lists and you've cooked it into a product, right? So an increment can be a part of a product. So your increments can just be one feature in your product. It can just be one new page on your website, right? A product increment, that's the word increment, is an addition to a product. It's a progress to a product. And that increment that you create at the end of the sprint is what you then take into the sprint review. Bring in external stakeholders to look at it together, right? Bring in external stakeholders to look, not just any external stakeholders, people that are affected by whatever it is that you've built that sprint. You get their feedback, you demo it to them. Sprint review is not a talk space. Whatever it is you've done, it's a time to show it so people can see it and feel it. If it's a mobile app, something, if it's something you can give people access to even test, even if it's a software on your laptop, a website or something, that people can have access to that test environment during that sprint review to interact with it and give some feedback. It's like a space of also doing some kind of like user testing, right? You've only built for 2 weeks or so, right? So it's something they can probably just test within 10 minutes. Oh, this is good, this works, you get some feedback. So that means whatever you've done, whatever your increment is at the end of the sprint, you are not deploying it, you're not releasing it to production yet until after your sprint review, because you need to get feedback and things like that, right? So, and some teams sometimes don't always do their sprint review on the last day of the sprint. Some teams somehow do their sprint review the day before the last day. It sounds a bit counterintuitive, but maybe because over time they've realized that during the sprint review, they get a lot of feedback. And if they're doing it on the last day, they don't have enough time to be able to then incorporate that feedback again. They just now carry over to the next sprint. So some people can do it on a, if their sprint is on a Friday, they can do it on a Thursday. So any last feedback they get, they can see if they can fix and adjust them on a Friday and use that Friday to deploy to production and all that, right? And then they can spend some other day time on that Friday to do some backlog refinements as well. And then, well, the sprint retrospective must be on the last day, because that is not for getting external feedback. That is for the team discussing within themselves, not on the product, but on the people. It can be the people, it can be your tools, it can be props, environments and things like that. Discuss how we can improve together. So those suggestions that come from the sprint retrospective, of course, if you get too many suggestions, you can't implement everything in the next sprint, but you need to implement some of them in the next sprint. So now we've talked about together, I've whipped the conversation of the product backlog, sprint backlog, and increments. Those are your 3 artifacts. And then we've also talked about the 5 events: the sprint planning, the daily scrum, the sprint review, the sprint retrospective. And let's make this a little bit of a short quiz. What then is the 5th event? Because it looks like we only talked about 4. The 5th event is the sprint. The sprint itself is an event. Yeah. So if you look at the color codes here, those yellow circles tells us what the events are. So a sprint is an event itself. Yeah, the sprint is the heartbeat of Scrum. You can't say you are doing Scrum if you don't split work in sprints. And people abuse that word sprint a lot. But sprints must have a fixed date when you must finish it, and it cannot be longer than 1 month. And then we see the backlog refinement is not an event, it's not an artifact, it's just an ongoing activity. The same way you're not just going to call design an event, or development an event, or testing an event. Is an ongoing activity. That's the same way your refinement is an ongoing activity. You look at your requirements, you look at the user stories, clarify them, improve them, and whatnot. Yeah, so this is a document this is something you can download. You can share the link as well. You can download this, print it. It's very, very important that you have this. You're always looking at it and, making sure that you know what every one of all those things mean. So we'll take a break shortly. Then when we come back from the break, we'll now go deep into the things we said we're going to go deep into today: the daily Scrum, the sprint review, and the sprint retrospective. But before we go for that break, let's do a quick check from us to say, looking at this items here, once I point at something, you tell me what that thing is within the Scrum framework. Are we ready for that? What's this?
The product backlog.
Product backlog.
Yeah,
backlog.
the product backlog.
Sprint backlog.
Product backlog, thank you, which is a prioritized list of all the things that needs to be delivered to achieve the product backlog. And the commitment for the product backlog is what?
Product goal.
The product goal.
Product goal. Someone's speaker is a bit funny. All right, that's a product. It's the product backlog, and the product backlog is focused on achieving something called the product goal. And then what's this event that we have here?
Sprint planning.
Sprint planning.
The sprint planning, which is where we decide what we need to focus on within a particular sprint. And at the end of that sprint planning, we create something here that is called the what?
Acceptance criteria.
Backlog.
Sprint.
No, sprint backlog.
Yeah, the sprint backlog. So this is the sprint backlog. And the commitment for the sprint backlog is the what?
The sprint goal.
The sprint goal.
Someone talked about acceptance criteria earlier. Acceptance criteria is something that each item you have in your product backlog should have their own acceptance criteria. So your product backlog item could be a user story. User story is the most popular way of writing each item, but some people can just make it a list and not a user story, right? So each user story or each product backlog item have their own acceptance criteria. So by the time you move things into this sprint backlog, every user story in this sprint backlog has its own acceptance criteria. But together, this is a sprint backlog, and the commitment for the sprint backlog is the sprint goal. And this circle that we have here is the what?
Sprint.
That's the sprint where we actually get to do all the work, right? And within that sprint, we have a Scrum team where we have what roles?
Scrum Master and
Product owner,
Tester.
development team.
And the development team. Your tester is part of the development team. Your software engineers is part of the development team. Your designers is part of the development team. That's a terminology in Scrum to make it easy to use everywhere so that you don't over describe the roles and then it's too software specific. So your development team is everybody developing that product, the solution. And within that sprint, which cannot be longer than one?
4 weeks. 4 weeks.
1 month.
1 month.
1 month.
Yeah, the correct answer is not 4 weeks. The correct answer is 1 month.
1 month.
Because 4 weeks is 28 days. 1 month varies, 30, 31 and stuff, right? So
and then you got February 28th.
Exactly. You got February, which is 28 days or 29 once in a leap year. So the sprints cannot be longer than 1 month. So, and during the sprint, there's something we do every day. It is called what?
The daily stand-up.
Now, the correct answer is not daily stand-up. The correct answer is what?
Daily Scrum.
Daily Scrum.
Yeah, the correct answer is daily Scrum. Of course, in reality, it's the same thing. Your daily Scrum, your daily stand-up is the same thing. But I'm saying that because when you're writing an exam, they can put daily stand-up as an option there and daily Scrum as an option. If you are talking Scrum, that event is called a daily Scrum, but it's the same thing as a daily stand-up. Some of that daily stand-up was created because there are some other agile ways of working that are not necessarily Scrum, and it doesn't really make sense if your team is doing Kanban and you call the daily call a daily Scrum. So that's why daily stand-up became a more generic terminology for it. Just like in some agile approaches, they would call the sprint a what? Who knows that?
What is it?
If you are doing a different agile approach that is not Scrum, what other name will they use for the sprint?
Iteration.
Iteration. So if it's a generic agile approach, they can call it an iteration and not necessarily, but sprint is a Scrum specific terminology. So yeah, you got a daily Scrum, which you do every day, and it has to be the same time. At the end of the sprint, you create something called the what?
Sprint
review.
The increments, not sprint increments, but increments. Increments, yeah? So you create an increment that you can see it as a product increment as well. But I believe the terminology is not being adjusted to increment because some teams are using Scrum and they're not necessarily working on a product. It can be a service. So they get an increment. So it means an addition to whatever you have existing. And if it's food, you are cooking as well too, you know? You've finished serving one pot, you cook another pot again. That pot now is an increment, an addition to whatever the existing ones you've poured in that big container earlier. So you get an increment, which is an addition to whatever solution you're creating. And then you take that increment into an event called what?
Sprint review.
The sprint review, where you get feedback from stakeholders and whatnot. And at the end of that sprint review, you do an event called
Sprint retrospective.
Sprint retrospective, where you get feedback on how you can improve together as a team. And that you take that into like your next sprint planning. You say, hey, we had 5 suggestions the last time. Well, we can implement all these 5 suggestions. Let's take 2 of them and plan it into this current sprint. So your sprint backlog is not just a list of product items that you're working on. It can also be some process improvements that you need to achieve together as a team. So that's fantastic. So you already know everything about Scrum. You memorize it clearly. So we'll stop this at this point. We'll take a short break for 7 minutes. We'll be back in 7 minutes, and then when we come back at this time, we'll take each of all these elements, take deep dive in them, we'll discuss them together, we'll discuss the theory, discuss the practical, and then we'll have made some good progress into this session. So enjoy your break. See you in 6 minutes now.